So hello everyone, my name's Toby Sinclair, and today I'll be sharing with you the lessons learned becoming a product-centric organisation. I work at JP Morgan, where I'm a director in strategy and transformation. And today I'll be sharing with you an experience that's gone over a few years and the lessons that I've learned along the way. So the context of this talk, so this story and experience will be shared from some work that I led within a 1,500 person part of the organization. This was mainly in the technology organization. And in this context, the customers were mainly internal employees, so people that worked within the organization. When we started, around what they called 40 different types of products, and we'll be exploring what that means, what we mean by product throughout this talk. And the reason for this change to start was really around the desire to improve customer satisfaction and the value delivered, and also reduce the time it took to deliver that value. And the intention was that by adopting more of a product-centric view to the organization, some of these could be achieved. And this journey has kind of played out over about 3 years, and I'll be sharing with you the lessons learned along the way. So your key takeaway from this talk is really how product definition influences organizational effectiveness. The structure of this talk is I'll share 5 anti-patterns and 5 associated patterns that I've learned through this journey to become a product-centric organization. You can see the definitions here for an anti-pattern and a pattern. The key thing to probably bear in mind as we go through the talk, the patterns that I share are very context specific, so they may be relevant in your context. However, a pattern for me and the organization I'm working in might be an anti-pattern for you. So please bear in mind the context in which your organization operates as I go through this. But by sharing these anti-patterns and patterns, my hope is that you'll take away and learn some things that you could do differently within your organizational transformation. So the first anti-pattern is really around seeing a product as an application. So this is a very common anti-pattern that I see within technology organizations, where there's an assumption that the application and technology components are the product. So you'll see that it's like examples. If you ask people across your organization, what is the product? Typically, they'll point to a technology application. So in this context, as I said, we're working with internal employees. And a lot of those applications were things like Skype, Slack, Microsoft Teams, Zoom, when there was a need for employees to be able to collaborate or communicate with each other. So if you ask someone what's the product, there's a bias towards the technology being the product. And as a result, there's a heavy focus and bias towards making the technology better versus meeting the underlying customer need and delivering value for them. So the impact that this can have on the organization is that we end up focusing on the technology and maximizing the value that we want to deliver to customers. And often we don't anticipate the needs that they have, and we don't meet those unmet needs for the customer. So the pattern here really is to start to think about your product in a non-technology sense. And really the pattern is to think about your product as a customer need. So if I give you the example in the context in which this journey was on, was the shift towards thinking of the product as collaboration, not the product being Microsoft Teams or Slack or Skype. So really starting to take a step back and looking more holistically at what is the customer needs that we're trying to get met and the value we're trying to deliver for those customers. So in this example, as I said, the customer was the internal employees, and really the product was around how can we provide collaboration value to those customers. So this is where the product really becomes collaboration versus a Slack or a Skype. And this drives much more organizational sort of strategic thinking about how do we meet the needs of collaboration. And as we can see recently over the last sort of 6 months or so, collaboration needs have changed dramatically as we've started to work in different ways. So by operating in this way, we can more quickly anticipate the customer's need and respond appropriately with the various solutions that we can deploy. So really the impact here by applying this pattern is you can start to increase the amount of value you deliver, and also look at how you can also reduce duplication. So instead of having multiple, say, chat tools or communication tools, you can really make better decisions around what's right for your employees within your context. The next anti-pattern is where the structure drives the product. So as I shared there, you need to think about the product in more of a customer-centric way. But one of the challenges we found on our journey was, if you look at defining the product, and let's assume, for example, you've got 8 senior leaders in a room, it's likely when you drive the conversation around what is the product, you'll end up with 8 products at the end of it. So the existing structure will drive the products that get created. A lot of this is driven by the need to have a sense of ownership within an organization. Often very senior management own certain parts of the delivery chain or certain applications and technology stacks. And often when we start to think about product in this broader, more customer-centric way, it can lead to a radical change in the structure, and can often mean that certain leaders, the roles they're performing now may be changed considerably as we start to think about product in a more customer-centric way. The second thing from how I've seen structure influence the product definition is the levels within the organization. So if you've got a deep hierarchy of roles, typically it'll end up in a layered product structure. So you might have subproducts of subproducts of subproducts. So the number of layers in your existing organization will influence the complexity and narrowness of your product. And the impact of that is this anti-pattern drives complex and ineffective product structures that are not really optimized to deliver customer value, as we described earlier, and can lead to more delays in your delivery. So what's the pattern to overcome this? So really it's about starting to think about product driving structure. So the first thing we need to do is get a really good handle on what is the product and define it in that broader sense aligned to the customer. And this means ultimately, when you think about the structure, is built increasing the safety within the organization, that once we go down this path of defining broader products, making people safe and secure, that their role might change, but their job is secure. And that's really important to allow people to embrace the changes that we want to introduce. One of the ways we did this is we ran several product definition workshops where we involved senior leaders, development teams, customers as part of that conversation, and went for a structured process of how we actually define the product. And often this led to real light bulb moments for leaders within the room. And a key part of that really helped with those product definition workshops is having an independent voice in that room as well, to really challenge and help the organization think differently. And the result of this pattern is really you end up with a much more simple and streamlined product structure that's optimized really for the customer rather than the organization internally. So just to take a pause here on those first two, I'm going to share another 3 anti-patterns and patterns. But what's really important here is it's really critical to get those first 2 patterns right. How we define the product and the structure will have a strong influence on everything else that's to come. One of our lessons learned as we went through this journey earlier on is we didn't really get the product definition right. And as a result, a lot of other challenges emerged. Whereas once you start to define the product broadly around a customer need and use that product to drive the structure, a lot of the anti-patterns, which I'll share now, get reduced, and a lot of the patterns get amplified. So moving on to some more anti-patterns. So the next anti-pattern I've seen, especially within technology organizations, is when we start to have technology managers rather than product people or product managers or product owners. And the anti-pattern here is typically when we go on this journey and we're trying to move to more of a product-centric organization, there's a tendency to rebadge or relabel existing leaders within the technology organization as product people. And the challenge that this brings is often those technology leaders can have more of a bias towards the technology solution rather than the problem space. So in my experience, they tend to be much more comfortable working with the development teams, with the technology stack and dealing with challenges and issues there, than setting up focus groups, running design sessions with customers, and really getting out into the field and working with customers on their problems. Secondly, often technology managers have a breadth and experience around managing technology and all the skills that come with that, but they perhaps don't have depth in product management professional skills. So the impact that this can have on the organizational effectiveness is that we can run the risk of having really good technology, but doesn't really maximize the value to the customer or doesn't really meet the need of the customer. And secondly, we can also end up with, if we're not careful, as I said earlier, duplicative technology, because technology managers have their preferences for different technology stacks. So you can end up with a kind of complicated and duplicated technology organization as well. So the pattern to overcome this is really to start to look at introducing product people into your organization. So I've used the general term product people. You might be familiar with the terms like product owner, product manager. There's a lot of confusion across the organization in those terms. So I tend to make it more simple around, ultimately, we want product people, whatever we call them, is something I won't go into today. But really what we're looking for is professionals, people that have professional product management skills. So they have all the skills of product management around discovery, product strategy, product roadmaps, financials, measurements, focus on outcomes, all of these skills. And really the sign for me in terms of really strong product management professionals is they've got a great ability of managing across many products, even if they don't have the depth of knowledge within that domain. They have the skills and experience to very quickly understand who are the customers, what do we need to deliver, and what is the value we need to deliver. And there's more of a bias, in my experience, towards the problem space versus the solution space, which means that they're more likely to spend time with the customers, understanding the problem and getting a real strong understanding of what value looks like. So the impact and benefit of this pattern is that you can ultimately have a better understanding of your customers and the value that you want, and can also really amplify that product definition, ensuring that it's fit for purpose as it changes over time. The next anti-pattern is something you're probably all familiar with, is this idea around the product person as a mini CEO. So if you Google, you'll typically find a lot of people referencing the product person as kind of a CEO figure. My experience is that's a bit of an anti-pattern. And the reason for that is often there's an assumption then the product person really needs to own everything. And there's a tendency to overload product people with so much activities. And what tends to happen then, I found, is the product person can get overburdened and distracted by organizational concerns rather than product management activities. So a really great example I've seen is where the product person also then ends up with a lot of people management duties. Maybe organizationally, all of the technology organization, delivery organization reports to the product owner, so they have single accountability. But this can lead to a lot of distraction with a lot of the people management and organizational matters, which can lead to distracted, overstressed product owners or product people. And then the side effect of this I found is that as the product people get overburdened, they typically start asking for help. And this is where they end up hiring and bringing in additional product people. So you might end up with a junior product owner or a junior product manager or several BAs, and the product organization can end up growing. And as a result, you end up with a very complex structure, and people start questioning who is actually the product person that's in charge here or owns the product. So the pattern I like to think we've seen is where we actually think about product partnership. So this is where instead of really there being a single person accountable, we really look at how do we build the right partnerships across the organization to deliver the product value that we need to. So a key partnership I found here is that the partnership between strong product person and an engineering lead or manager or engineering person. And really this partnership is critical to build a strong relationship so both individuals or people can bring their skills to the table to ensure we can deliver a great product. Now, what's really important here is the relationship between those two people needs to be very strong. Otherwise, it can lead to further anti-patterns and dysfunction. So really focusing, if you're going to hire into these individual roles, hiring for a partnership, not for individual success. And the impact I've seen of this pattern is you get strong performance from a product management perspective and from an engineering delivery perspective. So you end up with everyone playing to their strengths and really delivering the value that we need. So really, this pattern is a focus on building partnerships and collaboration across the organization, which is really the key to success here, rather than relying on an individual to really be the CEO of everything. And then just the final kind of anti-pattern and pattern. The anti-pattern here is building upon this is really having technology-centric backlogs. So one of the patterns here is where I've seen backlogs be associated to technology components or applications across the organization. And often the items within this backlog are described from kind of a technology point of view and often describe a lot of technology tasks. And when you read through this backlog, it's very hard to get a sense of what is the value we're trying to deliver here. And as a result, you kind of end up with lots of backlogs across the organization. And what ends up happening is the transparency of what we're trying to deliver is very low. So it ends up with a high coordination cost. And often this is where you bring in program managers, project managers to try and stitch together these various backlogs to really get that transparency. So really the pattern for a product-centric organization is really to think about product backlogs. And the difference in this sense for a product backlog is really the product backlog largely describes the value we want to deliver to the customers and the business. The backlog, when you kind of read through it, you can often get a sense of the value we're trying to deliver to our customers. It's often much well refined. And it often has a strong link to the organizational strategy and the business strategy. So it's much easier to tell the story of what the value we're delivering is. And the impact of this is that it's much easier to ensure then that our organization is really focused on the highest value items from a customer and business point of view, rather than just focusing on technology items. So just summarizing the 5 patterns which I shared, so you can see a kind of a summary here. So again, it's really important to remember that the patterns that I've shared today might be suitable in, might not be suitable in your context. The pattern which I've shared now might be an anti-pattern for you. So it's really important to understand the context your organization is in, so you can best understand what interventions might help. But I hope through sharing these anti-patterns and patterns, just give you an idea of some of the things maybe to avoid, or at least to have a watch on as you take your organization through becoming a product-centric organization. And probably just another way to express this is there was a reason why I shared those anti-patterns and patterns in the sequence that I did, because really what we found is that also important to this is the steps that you go through. As I shared earlier, really defining your product and the structure is really important to do well right at the start. And then starting to build out the organization by hiring or developing the right people, building the right relationships, and then focusing on how you can express the value in a clear product backlog. These are really important steps that we learn that are really important to moving forward and helping you become a product-centric organization. So just to kind of summarize really the result we've seen from this. So as I shared earlier, this is a kind of part of the organization that focuses on delivering value for internal employees. So the kind of products we ended up with was kind of 3 very broad products. So around collaboration and communication, the workplace, and engagement, which engagement is things that allow the employees to engage with the organization. So things like your intranet, your help channels, those kind of things. Again, these 3 products, you can get a sense how broad they are, given there's about 1,500 people in the organization. So these are very broadly defined products, and each product has a product person associated to it that's driving out the strategy, has a product backlog associated at that broader level that the teams then pull from to deliver the work that they need to. In addition, we kind of define support groups, because again, it's key to remember not everything within your organization is necessarily a product. So these are areas of our organization that are mainly more delivered by people. So your kind of traditional help desk and kind of people that go and install equipment within the offices. And really the outcomes that we've seen, just to conclude, is really more empowered product people and a lot fewer of them. We've seen increased customer satisfaction measured by things like Net Promoter Score. We've seen a reduction in duplication from a technology point of view, which helps with our investment. And we've seen also a reduced delivery time by minimizing the amount of coordination costs and handoffs across the groups. By defining these broader products, we've been able to deliver more quickly, which over the last 6 months has really been significant for the organization, given the need for us to respond quickly to the changing collaboration needs within the firm, given the situation at the moment. And just a final slide to conclude is just to kind of, again, re-emphasize a focus on getting those first 2 patterns right. Defining your product in terms of the customer need in its broadest sense, rather than defining it as technology applications. And using your product definition then to drive your organizational structures. If you get these 2 patterns right, a lot of the ones I shared earlier, the anti-patterns I shared afterwards, around things like a technology backlog, the products, kind of technology managers, they'll be dampened. And a lot of the patterns, such as a product backlog, product partnership, and product people, will be amplified. So it's really important to get those 2 patterns right. And that's the end of my talk. So again, I hope this has helped for your organization on the journey that you're taking to become more product-centric. And I look forward to speaking to some of you again soon.